it's true. 'Cause every time she sings about the way she's falling, she don't know that I'm falling too.
Most people know that in 1956, John Wayne starred in an ill-conceived film that has not aged particularly well, where he for some reason decided that he was destined to play the Mongolian Emperor, Genghis Khan, called The Conqueror. Being a passion project for Wayne, he used his studio rapport to get the film made, after he had read the script and felt that he himself would be perfect for the starring role. But what a lot of people are not aware of is that out of the 220 people who worked on the crew of the film, 90 of them would be hospitalized and 46 of them would die. To cheaply find areas vast enough near California that would be believable to represent ancient Mongolia, the crew looked towards the area of Utah, near the Nevada border, spending many weeks within 100 miles of the federal government's Nevada National Security Test Site. A place where, in between the years 1951 and 1961, over 100 nuclear bombs would be detonated. The film crew knew about this, but stayed based on the government information that said that the surrounding areas were perfectly safe for people to be in. It was, however, not perfectly safe for them to be there. The film's director, Dick Powell, would die 7 years later from cancer. The film's stars, Susan Hayward, Pedro Armendariz, and John Wayne, would all die from cancer before 1980. A prominent doctor at the time, Robert Pendleton, said on the case in 1980, "With these numbers, this case could quantify as an epidemic. The connection between fallout radiation and cancer in individual cases has been practically impossible to prove conclusively. But in a group this size, you'd expect only 30-some cancers to develop. With 91 cancer cases, I think the tie-in to their exposure on the set of The Conqueror would hold up in a court of law." Nobody went to prison over this, or were even sued either on the studio or government side of the issue. Many people blamed the heavy smoking culture of the time to have resulted in all of the deaths associated with the movie, and that the high number of cancers was more or less a fluke. Agnes Moorehead, being both a hypochondriac and religious fundamentalist, had never smoked cigarettes in her life, or was known to drink alcohol, and died in 1974 of cancer. These statistics and numbers, based around 220 people, only actually include the mostly white actors and crew members, and do not account for a great deal of Native Americans who were hired to play the extras in the film. There are no records that exist to tell of what happened to those estimated 300 or 400. The film's producer, Howard Hughes, was struck with immense guilt as he started to realize what he had done in the 2 decades of fallout from making the film. He hired men to go on an exhaustive search and purchase every print of The Conqueror that still existed and destroyed most of them. It is said that in his later years of isolation from society, he would obsessively watch the movie by himself endlessly on repeat. Paramount Pictures purchased the rights to the film back 3 years after his death from his estate and re-released it to American audiences. In 1928, Warner Brothers were set to make their biblical epic disaster movie take on the story of Noah's Ark, and they spared no expense. Starring Dolores Costello, the so-called goddess of the silent screen, this came near the end of her height of power within Hollywood, the wife of John Barrymore and the grandmother of Drew Barrymore. She was a massive child star turned adult actor who had found success in the hearts of Americans for 3 decades now. But she sadly spoke with a lisp and would be forced to more or less retire in the transition to sound films. Her male lead co-star, George O'Brien, was a dependable actor mostly known for westerns and war films, and is most remembered in film history for his starring roles in this, as well as Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, and East Side, West Side. It was even directed by Michael Curtis, who would, 14 years later, go on to make Casablanca. It was made with an exceedingly steep budget of $1 million. The story itself is actually quite unhinged and has little to do actually with Noah's Ark itself, and was instead a World War I romance action film about Marie and Travis, who meet and slowly fall in love as we watch them navigate the tumultuous world that is wartime Europe, who are later trapped in an underground bunker due to German artillery fire. And to pass the time, a priest who is also trapped with them tells the group the story of Noah's Ark, relating the biblical flood to the flood of blood that the war has unleashed upon the earth. We then flash back to the time of Noah, where all of our characters now fill different roles within that story, with the priest playing Noah. During the titular flood sequences, over 600,000 gallons of water were rushed onto sets filled with nearly 8,000 extras, who were not prepared for what was about to happen. They had little to no safety precautions or rehearsals, and the filmmakers themselves just hoped for the best when they did this. All reactions that you see on screen are genuine fights for survival. 3 men drowned in the making of this scene. Another sustained injuries that were so extensive that his leg had to be amputated. Dolores Costello was hospitalized from pneumonia from being in the cold water for hours on end, and in total 35 ambulances were called to the scene to assist with injuries. Funny enough, one of these 8,000 extras that were trapped in these floodwaters was John Wayne. In the silent film era, there were many tragedies that struck film sets due to the lack of regulations and on-set ethics. Screen actor Wallace Reed died because of an event that occurred while filming Valley of the Giants. During a train wreck sequence, he sustained an injury to his scalp. And to prevent production from having to stop for the week, he began to take regular doses of morphine throughout the day to dull his pain. He quickly became addicted. He couldn't shake the habit. His career fell to shambles, and he died of the flu soon after in a sanatorium. Actress Barbara Lamar similarly died at the age of 29. She broke an ankle on the set of Souls for Sale, and doctors prescribed her morphine as well as cocaine, which would lead to her developing an addiction that would consume her 3 years later. Actor Harold Lloyd was blinded and lost a thumb and finger on the set of Haunted Spooks when he lit the fuse of what he thought was a prop bomb, but was instead a real bomb that detonated before he could get away. His face would be badly burned, and he would have to take a year off to recover. He kept the incident a secret and publicly wore gloves the rest of his career to hide the fact that he was missing several fingers. This would sadly mark the end of his career in slapstick comedy roles, which, if you've never watched any Harold Lloyd silent comedies, I would highly recommend it. He wasn't as popular or well-known today as Keaton or Chaplin, but his shorts are still very funny and do hold up. But from here, he would take on less physically challenging romantic roles in the few films that he would make after this, which are all considerably less interesting and entertaining, and the bomb incident on Haunted Spooks can largely be attributed with the end of his mainstream career. In 1915's The Captive, for realism, Cecil B. DeMille ordered that the actors playing the soldiers should put live ammunitions into their machine guns for the scene where they blew open a door. One of the guns was accidentally not changed out for the next camera angle, where the soldiers barge into the room and kill the people hiding there, and as a result they inadvertently gunned down actor Charles Chandler, killing him instantly. Later in 1929, while filming The Goddess Girl, DeMille would badly burn actors Lena Basquette and Tom Keene in a scene where they are trapped in a burning building, which was simulated by lighting the set on fire. In 1925's The Great Circus Mystery, 2 stuntmen were killed in a car chase sequence. The footage of their death was used in the final film. In The Warrens of Virginia, actor Martha Mansfield was engulfed in flames when a man lit a cigarette and tossed the match to the side, igniting her Civil War period costume. The fire was quickly put out, but she would die from her burns the next day. She was only 24. In 1927's King of the Jungle, actor George Standing was mauled by a tiger and died. In 1930, Lon Chaney died at the age of 47 from cancer that was believed to be caused by an infection that was received from swallowing toxic fake snowflakes on the set of 1929's Thunder. Joe Martin was a prolific actor in the silent era that appeared in over 50 films, and was at the time recognized by most people around the country. Known for playing his goofy, hot-headed comedy character that was quick on the draw with a pistol in inappropriate situations, he soon became the face of Universal silent comedies, and endorsed many products and advertisements of the era. Joe Martin also happened to be an orangutan. And now, I can't lie and say that they were not absolutely cooking with the idea of a monkey with a handgun. But his story is pretty tragic, and is demonstrative of the kind of situation that Jordan Peele would later talk about in Nope. His breakout role was an animal attack comedy called Joe Martin Turns 'Em Loose, which the footage of has been lost today, but in its time was a massive hit, and was known for scenes of actors risking their lives filming comedic bits around live tigers. The advertisement for the film read, 2 reels of breathless, hair-raising interest, with comedy and near tragedy so closely knit that you don't know whether to laugh or yell a warning at the dozen or more actors who seem to be taking their lives in their hands for your amusement or entertainment. The most wonderful, difficult, fascinating animal picture ever made. No fake jungle stuff. No caged or toothless wild beasts. On the contrary, the picture includes all the man-eating lions, tigers, jaguars, leopards, as well as bears, elephants, camels, and a few wild cats from the costly and justly famous Universal City Zoo. They are released from their cages by Joe Martin on Circus Day. They chase the crowds, enter homes, stores, etc. And the fun is fast and furious, although you are expecting a tragedy every minute. This is not produced by Trick Photography, remember that. Surprisingly, the local Los Angeles News ran a story during the production that read, "A near riot was caused on the rear stage and in the zoo of Universal City the earliest part of this week, when practically all of the animals were turned loose for the filming of the one reel animal comedy, Joe Martin Turns 'Em Loose." For heightened drama, the director had asked for the least domesticated animals at the zoo to be loaned to the production. That director, Paul Bourgeois, would make several animal attack films for Hollywood before being outed as a con man, who used his power to run several schemes in Los Angeles, and upon being caught, he escaped the law and absconded to Arizona and then later to Belgium with his 19-year-old stenographer. Also, the aforementioned Universal City Zoo, by the way, was a tourist park where all animal performers from the film industry were held at when they were not acting, where they could be visited by their fans. Joe Martin was owned by a man in Hollywood named Curly Stecker, who raised him as a son in his house, and treated him as if he were a human alongside his natural-born son in the hopes of domesticating him, and making him acclimated to being around other people so that he would be easier to manage on future film sets. And as a result of this, Joe's personhood and human traits were both a marvel to people at the time, but also unnerving to some. Bishop Edward Hanna, who served the Catholic Church in San Francisco, visited Joe when taking a tour of Los Angeles, and was off-put when Joe took out a bottle of liquor and made him a cocktail, like a person would for any guest that visited their home. Edgar Rice Burroughs was shocked by how sophisticated he was when Joe went to stay with him for a weekend at his home, which did happen, specifically being surprised at Joe's ability to use a napkin, and his knowledge of which specific utensils were used for individual courses. Joe appeared in over 50 films in his career, usually comedies and often as the star. Production notes for one such film read, "The simian seems to understand what his director tells him, and he is doing some wonderful work." People in general got very weird about him for a short time, and treated him in ways that were both dangerous for him and for other people, as they granted him freedoms that he should not have been allowed, such as the ability to move around on his own. People became accustomed to being around him, to the point that they were lulled into acting as if he were an adult human man. He was allowed to attend the premieres of his own movies. He would wear custom-fit suits, and fix his own hair, and would loudly clap and scream in the theater when funny things happened on the screen, which would make the audiences laugh even harder. He was later in his acting career assigned a caged cell at the zoo, but he was entrusted with the keys to the door and was allowed to leave and walk around as he wished, and at night he would lock himself up in his own room. The co-founder of Universal Pictures, Carl Laemmle, published an open letter about Joe in the trades, and what follows are a few lines from it. "Universal has a new star. We have no contract with him, but we have made a real actor of him. True, he is temperamental, as nearly all stars are. But we never yet have seen any star more willing, more daring, more clever, or more brainy. He has never demanded the right to okay the pictures in which he appears. He has never even demanded a dressing room of his own. He has never insisted on having a director of his choosing. He has never quibbled about working on Sundays or holidays. He has never asked for more money, and he never will. He has shown a spirit of true manliness. For this reason, and many others, I feel that I owe him this public appreciation. We are now making a series of pictures with Joe Martin as the star. Any exhibitor who does not book the whole series is simply making a Joe Martin of himself." Joe was, in this era, often mistaken for a chimpanzee, and several times played them in films. And this was because of the black and white photography, but also because the studio liked the look of having his face clean shaven and his hair trimmed short. He supposedly sometimes enjoyed the shaving process, but on other days was known to attack barbers, and this quickly became an unpredictable and dangerous task. He became a regular topic of interest for late 19-teens Americans, and he began to receive a great deal of fan mail, many of which genuinely expressed confusion on if Joe was really actually a monkey, or instead a man in a suit, including one from a child that read, "Dear Joe Martin, I wish you would send me your picture. My papa says you are only a monkey, but I think you are an actor." But then things began to go south. In 1918, while working on a film, Joe Martin contracted the Spanish flu, and was on the verge of death for nearly a month. From then on, for the remainder of the pandemic, he would wear a mask while out in public. Late that same year, a security guard named Thomas Cockings sued Universal for $10,000 because he allegedly had been bitten by Joe Martin over 40 times. In private, one director said that the guard had been purposefully antagonistic once to Martin, which led to the orangutan to hold a grudge against him. When, on his nightly patrol around the facilities, he once offered Joe a cup of whiskey that he had put spices in it purposefully to burn his mouth because he thought it would be funny. In 1919, Joe went on his first rampage. He destroyed several offices at the zoo and used his keys to free an elephant as well as 15 wolves. He then left the grounds of the zoo, which he was not known to often do, and found an outdoor church event and terrorized everyone there who fled for their lives. It was reported that the preacher climbed a telephone pole to try and get away from him. He was later found sleeping on a beach nearby where Curly Stecker lassoed him and brought him back into captivity. Soon after, he was filming a scene where an adult hits a child, and even though this was not real, it upset Joe, and he attacked the man to protect the child. The news reports from the incident read, "Stepping down from his chair, Joe rushed the offending player. He grappled him around the ankles and tripped him up with a flying tackle that would have done wonders for any collegiate pigskinner." Having upset his victim, Joe stood over him grinning evilly with long, barbed teeth, and gathered the little kid to his hairy breast with his free arm. In 1919, he would bite and severely injure the director of one of his films. The incident started with the director yelling at Joe for slamming a door so hard while exiting a scene that he broke the wall of the set that the door was attached to, meaning that they could not film anymore for the rest of the day. In response, Joe attacked him, bit him in multiple places, and then dragged him by the ankle to the stairs and threw him down them, where he would roll for 2 flights before hitting the wall. The next year, the same director yelled at Joe Martin again on the set of A Wild Night, and Joe bit him and almost tore a chunk off of his body. He would later say, "When a chimpanzee bites you, he doesn't just give you one quick bite. He clamps his teeth in, gets set, and then puts on the pressure. And I could feel each tooth mauling into my leg." The next year, Joe attacked Tarzan actor Gene Poller on the set of The Revenge of Tarzan. In a scene where they are running through the jungle together, a branch was pushed out of the way by Poller, and then snapped back into place, smacking Joe in the nose. He leapt onto Poller's back and began to smash him over and over again with his fists, and it took several men to peel him off the actor. That summer, Joe took off filming and was loaned temporarily to the Ringling Brothers Circus, where he was displayed in a cage with a black man named Congo from Africa that was labeled as a sideshow African bushman. In December of that year, he would attack a man playing a villain in a film in a scene where he perceived a woman to be in danger. The paper said of this, "Joe seized the villain with his long, powerful arms and pulled his legs from under him. The villain fell to the floor with a startled cry for help, and Stecker had to explain to the trained orangutan that the threatening attitude was all in the picture." By the next year, Joe Martin's income was roughly $1,700 a week, which was enough money to warrant sliding any of his incidents under the rug just to keep the show going. In one rampage, Joe attempted several murders, and Curly Stecker was quoted on it saying that the event lasted a week, in which time he took a gun away from one of the policemen who was attempting to catch him, and was about to kill the cop when the rest of us were able to seize him and truss him. That same year, he bit Curly Stecker's wife's ankle so hard that he left tooth marks in her bones. As a result, they had all of his teeth removed except for the front ones, which they ground down to be as smooth as possible. Universal also got into trouble over fraud, related to them not giving Joe his mail that was addressed directly to him. And as such, a new morning routine began where he himself had to open any letters that had his name on them, and then give them back to Universal staff to read. Which, I understand, does sound fake, but that really did happen. The news article on the case read, "Joe gets about a dozen letters a day from all over the world, most of his correspondence being under the impression that he is a little man dressed up like a monkey. It is the reverse. He is a little monkey dressed like a man. To be more exact, a 5'5" orangutan with a human brain." Inspector Cookson of the Los Angeles office of the Postal Inspectors is interested in determining Joe's rights to his own mail under the postal laws. Technically, Joe is an animal. Actually, he is an animal with a human brain, and people write to him under perfectly good 2-cent stamps. Just to avoid any encounter with the federal grand jury, Stecker has just instructed Joe Martin to open up his own mail. It is a regular morning ceremony now at the Universal City Arena. It was around this time that Curly Stecker was deemed to be a problem and Universal forced him out of Joe's life. Stecker would soon after be killed in his early 30s by the same elephant that Joe had previously set free on the set of The Brass Bottle, when the elephant used his trunk to pull Stecker headfirst into its mouth, and then used its legs to kneel on him, bending him backwards and breaking many of his bones. He died in his home from his injuries almost a full year later after the event. Universal lost control of Joe after Curly Stecker was forced out. One note at the time read, "Some think Joe Martin is incurably insane." When Joe showed signs of melancholia over Stecker's absence, a little monkey was placed in his cage in hopes that the companionship would stop his brooding. Joe beat the monkey to death against the bars. He attacked several employees of the zoo and became more reclusive. On the set of Trifling Woman, he became possessive over Barbara Lamar, who he showed a great interest in, and attacked the romantic co-lead Edward Connolly in a scene where Joe had to watch him give her pearls. It took over 10 minutes for them to remove Joe from Connolly, breaking Connolly's arm in the process and mangling his hand. For the other scenes in which he was supposed to appear in the film, the studio opted to use matte paintings to make it appear as if he had been on set. In his last few films, he was only shown caged, as Universal did not trust Joe to be around performers anymore. By 1924, Joe was deemed by Universal to be too dangerous to work with any longer in any capacity. Many specifically thought that he had been driven insane. They sold him to the Al G. Barnes Circus, where he would be a performing monkey until his death in 1931. Looking back on him in 1935, Dave Robeson, a friend of Al G. Barnes, would say, Joe Martin would wear a man's clothing and eat in a civilized manner, using his dishes and cutlery in the formal way. He was fond of whiskey and cigars. As he strolled about the circus tent, walking upright like a man, puffing a cigar and swinging a cane, he attracted a lot of attention and proved to be a great drawing card. His bed was built for a human being, and Joe comported himself like a man, sleeping in pajamas in apparent enjoyment. His act of expectorating was especially comical, and he chewed tobacco as if it had been a lifelong habit. While touring with the circus one day, Joe Martin went into an outrage after becoming frustrated with his clothing that had gotten tangled, and he had to be punched out by the circus strongman. The later circumstances surrounding the events of his death are still a mystery. As we entered the 1930s, it became the era of sound and guild unions that supposedly protected the rights of creatives, that implemented safety regulations that were put in place to hopefully stop this kind of thing from happening. But they still, unfortunately, were all too common. In 1931, while making the Viking in icy waters around Newfoundland, Canada, 27 men died, including the director of the film, after the ship they were on struck a sheet of ice, causing the dynamite on board to explode. That, ironically, had been on board to begin with to blow up any ice if the ship had gotten stuck. Harold Lloyd's brother, Gaylord Lloyd, lost an eye on the set of the film Scarface after his character was shot, and the explosive in his shirt that was to mimic a gunshot wound detonated in a weird way, sending shrapnel up into his face. In 1935, 4 men were hospitalized and 4 horses had to be put down from a stunt that had gone wrong on the Crusades, which was also directed by Cecil B. DeMille. In 1936, a stuntman and an estimated dozens of horses died while filming The Charge of the Light Brigade, which was also directed by Michael Curtiz. At least 125 horses sustained serious injuries filming this battle sequence, and at least 25 of them died, although the real number is probably a little bit higher. The bloodbath got so severe that people got into a physical altercation with Curtiz to try and stop it from happening. In 1937's The Road Back, for realism, live machine gun ammunition was used in some of the battle sequences, including one where the main actors were being fired on. Luckily and surprisingly, nobody was harmed from this, but one stunt performer did die from a nearby explosion. Reap of the Wild Wind in 1942 had John Wayne performing dangerous underwater stunts that left him with an inner ear condition for the rest of his life. In 1947, 9 people suffered severe burns during the filming of a battle sequence in Unconquered, because Cecil B. DeMille insisted that real-life explosions and flaming arrows be used on the set. 10 years later on The Ten Commandments, there would be multiple scorpion and cobra bite injuries, because DeMille demanded that these sandstorm scenes be filmed on location, which disrupted the natural wildlife buried in the sand. In the filming of Summertime in 1955 with Katharine Hepburn, there was a comedic scene where her character is trying to take a photograph and keeps stepping backwards until she falls into the canal behind her. She did not want to do this, because she did not feel that it was either sanitary or safe, and director David Lean pressured her into doing it. They filmed 4 different takes, and Hepburn would contract bacterial conjunctivitis that would bother her on and off for the rest of her life. In 1959, Dick York tore the muscles in his back in an accident related to a stunt involving a handcar on a railroad track for the movie They Came to Condura. And his injuries would be so severe that he would have lifelong pain that would eventually result in him retiring early and giving up the very lucrative job as the co-lead of Bewitched. In 1960, actor Leonard Sachs was badly burned in a stunt for the Siege of Sydney Street. They coated his arms, legs, and torso with the fireproof jelly, but ran out of time and had to perform the stunt with no safety coverings for his face or head, because to do that would have taken an additional 20 minutes or so, and producers were pressuring them to do the stunt as fast as they could. Kim Novak had filmed 2/3 of her scenes as the leading lady for the 1966 horror film Eye of the Devil, before she fell off of a horse doing a stunt breaking her back, which required the entire movie having to be reshot with Deborah Kerr. The injury took so long for her to recover that the world more or less passed her by, and Novak would only appear in a few small films for the rest of her career. The well-known incident that happened on the set of the Twilight Zone movie is, of course, a tragedy, as is everything that we are talking about in this video. But what some may not know is how often in history that has happened in the relation to big productions of movies. The Twilight Zone just happened to be the event that caught headlines because it involved children, and John Landis was a big name attached to the disaster. But in actuality, it is far from a rare event within the film industry. People have died in aircraft-related incidents in the making of the following productions: The Skywaymen, Around the World in 80 Days, Hell's Angels, Such Men Are Dangerous, Barquero, Catch-22, Zeppelin, The Red Baron, Primal Man, Revenge, Magnum P.I., Top Gun, Dangerous Flights, World War III, High Road to China, Airwolf, Runaway Train, Missing in Action 3, Delta Force 2, The Final Season, Campus PD, and American Made. In total, at least 89 people by my count have died related to aircraft-related disasters in association with major movies and television shows in the past 100 years. And those are just the ones that I found by doing a few quick searches. I'm sure that the number is actually probably much higher than that. This list only includes the films that had actual fatalities, and the list of ones that only had major accidents related to aircraft is substantially longer. Cameraman John Jordan, who died by aircraft on the set of Catch-22, had earlier in his career had his foot cut off by a helicopter on the set of You Only Live Once. Roar is the film that ties into our theme of the month, of works with very long production cycles, and probably is the most reckless single film that has ever been made. A perfect storm of Hollywood narcissism and money, colliding into one of the strangest events that has ever happened in the film industry, or just happened in general. In 1969, while making the horror film Satan's Harvest in Africa, Tippi Hedren and her husband, director and producer Noel Marshall, became enamored by lions when seeing them on a wildlife tour, and immediately decided that not only should they make a movie together about lions, but also that lions should just become a big integral part of their general lives. When working pre-production for the film that at this point was to be titled Lions, Lions, and More Lions, every big cat expert told them that it was dangerous to introduce too many big cats into one space together, and that the script they had written would not be feasible based on the realities of what these animals required to remain controllable, safe, and healthy. There were scenes in the script that Marshall had written that called for 30 or 40 lions to be on screen at any given time, and every person they approached to work on the film told them that that would not be a realistic possibility. They could not find a single big cat expert who was willing to work with them on the film, because Hedren and Marshall would not heed their warnings, and so they just decided to buy their own lions and tigers and do everything themselves that needed to be done for the film. They budgeted $3 million of their own money to do this, but would eventually spend over $17 million before it was all said and done. Marshall and Hedren in secret began to illegally purchase big cats from circuses, breeders, zoos, and other sources, and collected them on a plot of land that they had purchased just outside of Los Angeles, where they intended to eventually shoot their film. Afraid of being caught in violation of labor laws, they secretly hired contractors to build the sets off the books, and made sure that none of their employees were a part of any of the guild unions. They paid exorbitant amounts of money to bring native African plants to cover the landscape with, to create the illusion that their little plot of California countryside was, in fact, actually Africa, in the hopes of making it look natural amongst the lions. They also illegally rerouted a section of a river to flood part of their land to create an artificial lake for the film. The perimeter of the land was surrounded by a massive fence that they had installed, and the big cats were allowed free range of the property at all times, even within the home that the film takes place in. By the time that production started, the couple had acquired 71 lions, 26 tigers, a taigan, 9 panthers, 10 cougars, 2 jaguars, 4 leopards, 2 elephants, 6 swan, 4 geese, 4 cranes, 2 peacocks, 7 flamingos, and a stork. They were offered to take a hippopotamus, but decided that that was just too dangerous. The production was budgeted and scheduled to last for approximately 6 months, but they ran into an unsuspected issue, in that many of the plants that they had flown in from Africa were only green for a brief period of the year, and were brown for the majority of the time due to the climate. And since they needed to be green for the movie, there was only a couple of months out of the year that they could actually film footage outdoors with the animals. 6 years later, they would still be filming on the project, sinking hopelessly into debt, and at that point would have over 150 big cats in their growing collection. Togar, the main antagonist lion of the film, had been the personal pet of Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey. The cost alone of operating such a facility was over $4,000 a week just for meat. Hedren and Marshall would sell all of their other properties, which were 4 mansions across the United States, and 120 acres in the San Fernando Valley, just to keep the animals fed. Marshall was an executive producer on The Exorcist in 1971, and every cent of profit made from that immediately went into buying meat for the animals. The couple even eventually resorted to selling off their belongings, including auctioning off a fur coat that Alfred Hitchcock had given to Hedren. They did not have enough money to cover the expenses of hiring a professional crew. Plus, they were also trying to avoid the attention of the unions, and so they did all aspects of production on the film themselves as a family, with the addition of any friends or industry contacts that they had who were willing to help work extra days on the project for little to no money. Their son John was simultaneously the animal wrangler, boom operator, cameraman, and veterinarian. At one point in production, a lion got John on the ground and put his head in its mouth like a toy, and chewed on him lightly for about 25 minutes, before they were able to pull him away from the animal. He would be hospitalized for a great deal of time after this. Marshall told reporters at one point in the middle of the hopeless production, "You get into anything slowly. We have been on this project now for 5 years. Everything we own, everything we have achieved, is tied up in it. Today, we're 55% complete. We're at a point where we just have to do it." Filming the cats became a daily nightmare. Marshall and his friends would follow the animals around the property with cameras for days on end, shooting them documentary style, just hoping to capture anything interesting that could be included in the movie. They had not anticipated that cats are actually generally quite lazy animals, and spend most of their time either laying around or asleep. Often the lions and big cats would not willingly participate in scenes where it was needed for them to attack or chase characters. And in these instances, the cats would have to run and scream and act like prey to trigger their hunter senses, and then hope for the best. As you can imagine, and probably already know, many injuries resulted from this. John Marshall estimates that at least 100 people were hurt on their property in the making of the film. Much of the footage of this makes its way into the final cut. Everything that you see in the film is indeed real. Tippi Hedren herself would later say, "It's amazing no one was killed. We don't blame the cats. At first we just didn't know enough about them to stay out of trouble. But it was always a case of love at first bite, and we learned fast." Noel Marshall almost lost his arm from a lion bite, and would be hospitalized with gangrene. He would be bitten at least 15 times before the production of the film was over, and would contract blood poisoning, which septic shock only has about a 50% survival rate. Hedren would be bitten on the head by a lion, and almost quit making the film when one scene required her character to be licked on the face by a tiger. And after many different attempts, the only way that they figured out that they could achieve this was by covering her face in honey, and just hoping that the tiger would lick it off and not cave her head in with its jaws. At another point in production, an elephant picked her up by the ankle and threw her, injuring her back. She was scratched by a leopard and her chest was mauled by a cougar. She also would be hospitalized with gangrene. A sequence where they drive a car with big cats in the back took months to film, because they could not get a take where they either did not jump out of the moving car and run away or attack the drivers. Melanie Griffith, who is the daughter of Tippi Hedren from a previous marriage, did not want to do the film out of a fear for her safety, but was pressured into doing it by her mother. She would later be mauled in the face by a lion and require over 50 stitches and plastic surgery. There were a few hours where it was feared that they were going to have to remove one of her eyes. Jean de Bonne, who would later go on to be the cinematographer of films like Cujo, The Hunt for the Red October, and Basic Instinct, and would later direct both Speed and Twister, was famously scalped one day by the same lion that bit Hedren's skull. He would require hundreds of stitches, but still continued to work on the film after he had recovered. He was in his late 20s or early 30s at the time, and had never worked on a film before, and felt like this was his only way into the industry. A friend of theirs, Duran Kapur, was attacked by a lion who attempted to rip out his throat. He would receive excessive damage to his entire body that would require hours of intensive surgery. Many different people came to work on the film, but would leave within days after realizing what they had signed up for. In 1978, floodwaters damaged part of the fencing of the property, and as a result 15 big cats escaped. Local police would end up killing 3 of them, but the others were captured safely. The flood would delay filming for over a year, because it destroyed the lake that they had created and the house structure, as well as killed all of the African plants that they had ordered. Several lions died on the property in the flood as well. On top of this, much of the footage that they had been filming for years had been stored in a building on the property that was destroyed by the rushing waters. And as a result, they had to pay millions of dollars out of pocket to reconstruct the area to look exactly as it had before. Except this time, the work had to be done actively around around hundreds of lions and tigers. They then had to refilm many of the scenes that had been completed years previously. The next year, a California wildfire would hit the set, and everything that they rebuilt would be burned to the ground, and they would have to build the set again for a third time. Miraculously, no animals were harmed in the wildfires, but Marshall was mauled by several big cats trying to escape the flames and again nearly died. In total, at least 15 big cats were killed in the making of the film under their watch, although I imagine that number is probably substantially higher, because why would they tell the real amount of animals that they killed in the making of a movie that is about the importance of animal preservation? The film was finally completed in 1981. When all was said and done, they had spent so much money on the film that they could not find a company that was willing to distribute it for them, and as a result, it never released in America, and was only seen on theater screens in Australia, Japan, Germany, and Italy. Hedren and Marshall in the years since have lied about the nature of the production of the film, and tried to minimize some of their damage, and so the actual details of what happened on their property are at times fuzzy. In total, it was in production for roughly 11 years, and the couple spent untold amounts of money to see it completed that they would never make back. If you go off the figure of it costing roughly $4,000 a week for meat deliveries, then in the time of the production they spent about $2.5 million just on meat alone. And that figure of $4,000 came from early in the production, and isn't actually representative of what their cost may have been at the height of their animal collecting. Tippi Hedren, who is still alive today at the age of 94, would basically be financially ruined for the rest of her life, and as far as her career is concerned, she lost all of the reputation that she had built as a serious actor. Before this, she had been the star of Alfred Hitchcock films, but after the decade-long Roar debacle, she was lucky to get work on projects like In the Cold of the Night and Teresa's Tattoo. She would divorce Noel Marshall in 1982, a year after the film was completed, who would only work on one film again for the rest of his life, the 1988 River Phoenix movie, A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon. But just because we entered the modern era does not mean that any of this stopped. Linda Blair has had lifelong scoliosis, from injuries that she accrued from being thrown around on that bed in The Exorcist. On the same film, one crew member lost a toe and another a finger, and Ellen Burstyn would also suffer a back injury due to a scene where she falls down. PJ Soles ruptured her eardrum on Carrie when she was blasted in the head by a real fire hose. Dale Van Sickle received brain damage and was left permanently disabled because of a stunt that was not properly rehearsed on the Disney film No Deposit, No Return. A stunt actor died in 1976's Comes a Horseman, and the footage makes it into the final film. In 1978, Donald Sutherland was hit by a car when crossing the street while filming a sequence for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. A stunt actor was paralyzed in the production of Cannonball Run. Cameraman David Brostoff was killed while making Midnight Spares, a film that had no stunt coordinator and allowed regular actors who had not been properly trained to perform their own high-speed car stunts themselves. John Eric Hexum, the star of the CBS television show Cover Up, died when he jokingly shot himself in the head in front of the cast and crew with a blank, because he had not been properly trained and he believed there to be no danger, because there was no bullet. Jürgen Prochnow, who played Duke Leto in Lynch's Dune, received severe burns to his face when the tube designed to deliver his poison gas attack melted. Sylvester Stallone foolishly demanded that him and Dolph Lundgren be allowed to actually box in the climax of Rocky IV to make sure that the scene had an added sense of realism to it. And as a result, Stallone had to be airlifted to a hospital and was held in intensive care for over a week. Also with Stallone, a stunt actor died in an explosion on First Blood Part 2. Bruce Willis received permanent hearing damage while making Die Hard. Linda Hamilton received permanent hearing damage while making Terminator 2. In 1989's Cyborg, a stunt actor lost an eye when Jean-Claude Van Damme stuck a knife into it in a fight sequence. The actor later successfully sued him for negligence. This one is not a Hollywood film, but is worth mentioning nonetheless because of the enormity of the harm caused. Because 62 people were killed when they were burned alive on the set of The Sword of Tipu Sultan. A lack of general safety was given as the reason that this was allowed to happen. Bob Hoskins claims that he was accidentally stabbed 4 times during a stunt that went wrong on the Super Mario Bros. Movie. A wrongful death lawsuit was won against Paramount Pictures after Angela Bassett's stunt double died from a fall while making Wes Craven's Vampire in Brooklyn. 1 person died and 4 more were injured on Gone Fishin' when 2 high-speed boats collided. Also, this was written by J.J. Abrams. A crew member required a leg amputation while making Blues Brothers 2000 that was directed by none other than John Landis, after a car stunt was not properly rehearsed. A cameraman named Brent Hirschman died while making Pleasantville because he fell asleep while driving home, after being pressured to work weeks of 15 to 20-hour days. A stuntman was killed when he was struck in the head while filming The Crow, Stairway to Heaven. Vin Diesel's stunt double was killed on the set of Triple X when he hit a bridge at high speeds. Uma Thurman received a concussion and hurt her knees after being pressured by Quentin Tarantino to do a stunt involving a car that had not been planned or rehearsed that he thought of on the spot when they got to set that day. The stunt coordinator on the film would later tell The Hollywood Reporter, "No stunts of any kind were scheduled for the day of Miss Thurman's accident. All of the stunt department was put on hold and no one from the stunt department was called to set. At no point was I notified or consulted about Miss Thurman driving a car on camera that day. Had I been involved, I would have insisted not only on putting a professional driver behind the wheel, but also ensuring that the car itself was roadworthy and safe." This would mark the last time that she would work with Tarantino, and in 2018 she would say of the crash, "The circumstances of this event were negligent to the point of criminality." Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning while playing Jesus in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, which really isn't something that they could have predicted or prevented, but is funny enough to mention here. Charlize Theron herniated a disc and almost injured her spinal cord while performing a stunt on Aeon Flux. Daniel Craig hit his face so hard in a stunt that went wrong on Casino Royale that he busted out his front teeth. Cameraman Conway Wycliffe died on the set of The Dark Knight during one of the Batmobile chase sequences, when he was filming in the back of a fast-moving truck that missed its 90-degree turn and hit a tree. Set dresser David Ritchie was killed by falling debris on the set of Jumper. 10 extras sued the production of Valkyrie because they were placed in the back of an open World War II convoy truck and were flipped out of it at high speeds. Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double, David Holmes, was paralyzed on the set of the last Harry Potter movie. He had been his stunt double since the first film. Terry O'Quinn accidentally stabbed Matthew Fox in the chest on the set of Lost after he had been given a real knife when he thought he had been given a prop one. Stuntman Scott McLean suffered a permanent brain injury after a stunt had not been rehearsed enough, and he leapt from one moving car to another that was not in the right place at the right time, and was struck in the head by it. A steel wire snapped on the set of Transformers: Dark of the Moon, and hit an extra who received brain damage, and would be left paralyzed on her left side. A stuntman was scalped on the set of The Avengers, when he missed his mark in a fall and landed on a pile of bricks. A crew member drowned while filming an underwater sequence in The Lone Ranger. Danny DeVito almost died on the set of Always Sunny while filming the finale of season 11, when they added weights to him because he was too buoyant to sink in the water, like the scene called for. And then he weighed too much to pull back to the surface quickly. Some have insinuated that the event almost led to him quitting the show. One of the sets on Martin Scorsese's Silence collapsed on 3 construction workers, killing one of them. Stunt actor Olivia Jackson was severely injured on the set of Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, when she was performing a motorcycle stunt that ended with her colliding with the camera rig. Her face was partially torn off, and she was left with partial paralysis in one of her arms, that eventually had to be amputated. On the same film, only several days later, a man named Ricardo Cornelius was crushed to death by a falling Hummer off the back of a truck. A stunt actor named Joy Harris was killed on the set of Deadpool 2. Taylor Hickson received facial scars and required emergency surgery because of an incident that occurred on the set of the horror film Ghostland, where she was pressured to go further than she was comfortable with in an emotionally charged scene. The court filings of the event would later read, "In the course of shooting the scene, the director Pascal Laguerre constantly told Hickson to pound harder on the glass with her fists." The suit states, "At one point during filming of the scene, and after being asked to increase the strength with which she pounded on the glass, she asked one of the producers and the director if it was safe to do so. That producer and the director both replied in the affirmative. The glass shattered, causing her head and upper body to fall through the door and shards of glass. As a result of the incident, she badly cut the left side of her face, and was rushed to the hospital where she would receive 70 stitches. She would later say, 'The craft services lady held my face together with napkins in her hands.'" Michelle Williams was hit with an electric shock on the set of The Masked Singer from a special effect that was not properly wired, and the voltage was so high that the shoes that she was wearing split open when it happened. John Cho had to take almost a year off of acting due to an injury that he received within days of production beginning on Cowboy Bebop. This would delay the shoot for that entire time. On the upcoming Wonder Man MCU Disney Plus show, Spike Osario was crossing a catwalk that had not been properly constructed when it collapsed and he fell to his death. And on the upcoming film Rust, Alec Baldwin was given a loaded gun and fatally shot cinematographer Helena Hutchins. It should be said that all of these are far from the only stories like this. I just cherry-picked the most compelling or horrible ones, but this doesn't even cover a quarter of the history of needless Hollywood injuries. Why do these kinds of things happen? There's only one acceptable answer, which is negligence. Willing negligence is the only reason that this happens, mixed occasionally with narcissism and hubris. Money and decisions flow from the top. And when people decide to cut corners and do risky things without proper planning and thought put into them, we see what happens as a result. Making movies is simply dangerous. Even small stakes projects that don't require stunts still hold the chance of substantial accidents happening. I myself have both accidentally hurt myself and broken equipment while working in my small one-man studio that I shoot my videos at. That is just the reality of having people in a room with a lot of equipment. And it is imperative that these things get talked about, because in all walks of life, laborers get exploited and often injured by those with investing money, so that the people with the money can get half a percentage point richer, while meanwhile, the lives of those who have been injured will be forever affected in many cases. Filming is 90% planning and 10% action, and when you cut corners there, people can legitimately die. We live in a time of billionaires. According to Forbes, this year alone we have 265 new people who have achieved billionaire status. We live in a time of the devaluation of skilled labor, of AI being used to work around artists, not because it is better but because it is cheap, of writers and other craftsmen having to fight for months just for basic respect, and having to eventually somewhat compromise instead of being given every single thing that they were asking for. A modern Gilded Age, where deaths and injuries are still a common occurrence on major film sets, and where the art that is being produced on a fundamental level is not respected by those with power, beyond the numbers that it represents on a quarterly spreadsheet. And historically speaking, all of these that we have talked about today could have been avoided if those from the top had been forced to care for those at the bottom. And the only way that can happen is through accountability. Most of these accidents happened for ridiculous reasons that are not under any circumstances excusable. In 1919, Billy Ritchie was hospitalized because of an injury that he sustained on the set of the film Wet and Warmer when he was kicked in the stomach by an ostrich, which admittedly is funny, but he also could have died. Like, this stuff is not that important. These risks are not worth it. Out of all of the movies that I referenced in this video, how many of them did you actually recognize? Right? Entertainment is a fleeting thing. Nothing lasts forever. Few things last longer than a decade or so, and eventually everything is forgotten. And because of that, there are zero excuses to cut corners that result in deaths, lifelong pain, or severe injuries for something that will eventually just be a paragraph-long Wikipedia entry about something that happened 100 years ago if you are lucky. Going back to Dune from the previous video, I think one of the most pertinent details of that novel is that all religions that started on Earth have turned into a weird amalgamation of holy sludge because of the nature of time, and how everything loses its meaning and importance in the vastness of the void. Some of the finest moments of human art and history have been transmuted into some bizarre novelty document called the Orange Catholic Bible that seemingly only exists for poets like Gurney Halleck to quote from in times of great philosophical need. Nothing lasts, and that's a good thing. And in that mindset is where we have to reside in creation, to lower our perception of stakes that have been placed upon us so that we do not inadvertently end up severely hurting other people. Because the only reason that the vast majority of these movies are remembered at all is because of the tragedies that occurred when they cut corners. And I don't think anyone ever sets out to make art that only has that legacy.